White guest yells at black waiter during charity gala, then realizes it's his son's father. The evening air over the city shimmered with that particular kind of warmth reserved for charity galas, a carefully measured, artificial elegance that filled the streets surrounding the glass-walled Paramount Center with black cars, laughter spilling from champagne flutes, and the sound of orchestras warming up behind velvet-draped curtains. This was where New York's elite came not just to give, but to be seen giving, all smiles and silk, all hard on the sleeve when the camera was watching. Inside, the ballroom was a swirl of gold and light. Chatter buzzed like champagne bubbles between towering white floral arrangements and delicately clinking glassware. Men in designer tuxedos and women in couture moved between marble pillars like royalty, each one knowing exactly how far to tilt a laugh, how long to hold a gaze, how to donate just enough for applause, but not enough to seem too eager. And among them, dressed in crisp black and white, moving like smoke between tables, was a man named Jordan Knox. To most, he was just another waiter, gloved hands, quiet footsteps, and a voice kept politely low when announcing wines or gathering half-finished plates. But behind his eyes lived stories no guest that night would bother imagining. He had once studied architecture before life demanded quicker paychecks. He had once painted, and not just walls. And he had once loved a woman so fiercely, he still carried her memory like an ache behind his ribs, though it had been 10 years since she left this world, and 7 since he had last seen her son. His son. At table 14, Richard Whitmore was already half a bottle into the night. A tall, silver-templed man with money old enough to be whispered about and a temper sharp enough to be feared, Richard was exactly the kind of guest who believed the room bent slightly when he entered it. He leaned toward his companion, another investor from the Upper East Side, with a smile too big to be genuine, and said, "You know what I miss, Roger? Dinners where people actually served you like they meant it. These days it's all silent plates and blank stares. No dignity left in the art." Roger chuckled indulgently, adjusting his cufflinks. It was in that moment, that exact moment, when Jordan approached their table, his tray balanced, his steps silent, his posture straight. "Would you care for another glass of the Merlot, sir?" Jordan asked, voice smooth but quiet. Richard didn't look at him at first. He simply waved a hand without turning his head. But Jordan stood patiently, the bottle resting near the edge of the tray. Richard finally glanced up and paused. There was something in his expression, a flicker of something unspoken. Not recognition. Not yet. Just discomfort. Jordan saw it. He always did. That moment some white guests gave when they realized their server was black and standing taller than expected, straighter than necessary, and carried in his eyes the weight of someone who didn't apologize for being exactly where he was. "Are you going to pour, or just stand there breathing on me?" Richard said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Jordan didn't flinch. He had trained himself not to. "Of course," he replied, steady. "Just waiting for your glass." Richard smirked, lifting the goblet and setting it down harder than he needed to. The clang echoed slightly. A few heads turned. Jordan stepped forward and poured, a gentle stream of red catching the ballroom lights. "See," Richard said to Roger, "this is the problem. You give people a uniform and they think they're part of the party." A few people laughed. Others pretended not to hear. Jordan's jaw tightened for the briefest moment. But he finished pouring, nodded with the same calm he gave every table, and turned. "Don't forget we're not at your cousin's barbecue, friend," Richard added, louder now. "Try to keep it professional." This time, the laughter was forced. Jordan stopped mid-step, and for a heartbeat, everything froze. He turned, slowly. But before he could speak, a voice from behind Richard said, "Dad, what the hell was that?" The crowd turned. A young man, tall, fair-haired, early 20s, stood behind Richard, blazer slung over his shoulder, expression a mixture of shock and fury. Liam Whitmore, Columbia grad, interned at 2 startups before launching his own. The golden son of the Whitmore name. Excuse me, Richard asked, blinking. You don't speak to people like that, Liam said, approaching. What's wrong with you? Richard waved dismissively. Don't start. Liam ignored him and turned to Jordan. I'm really sorry, he said, voice lower, genuine. That was, I mean, he doesn't get to talk to anyone like that. Jordan studied the young man. There was something about the eyes. A certain way the brow pulled when he was angry, familiar. I appreciate that, Jordan said quietly. Liam nodded, then added, seriously. That was out of line. You didn't deserve that. For the briefest moment, their eyes locked. And Jordan felt something stir, something he hadn't dared allow himself in years. Recognition. But it was gone just as quickly. Liam turned and walked off toward the back hall. And Richard muttered, he's always been soft. Just like his. He stopped. His mouth hung open slightly. His eyes narrowed. He looked again at Jordan. And suddenly, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Of memory. Of something deeply buried and now clawing its way to the surface. His hand lowered slowly. He blinked once. Twice. And the color in his face shifted from flushed pink to something closer to ash. Because now he recognized him. The music had not stopped, but something in the room had shifted, as though the violinist's bow trembled ever so slightly, as though the chandeliers had dimmed a fraction in response to the tension that now rippled beneath the polished surface of the Gala. Richard Whitmore sat frozen. The wine glass that had just moments ago been the center of his performance now remained untouched, his fingers no longer draped around its stem, but curled inward, almost protectively, resting against his lap as if grasping for something. Anything to anchor him in the moment. Across the room, Jordan had resumed his rounds, but his steps were slower, more deliberate, not because he feared a confrontation, but because he now carried something heavier than a tray, the return of a truth he'd kept buried beneath years of quiet sacrifice. Liam's face had stirred it, the cheekbones slightly more defined than his father's. The way his jaw clenched when angry, just like her. Jordan had always wondered if he'd ever see his son again. But he had not expected it to be like this, not under crystal chandeliers and backhanded remarks. Not in a tuxedoed crowd where the man who once tried to erase him now sat wide-eyed and ghost-pale, as though he'd seen a ghost. And maybe, in a way, he had. 12 years earlier, it had been a very different night. Rain had poured outside a modest brownstone in Queens. Inside, warmth had flickered through old lamps. Music had spilled from a worn speaker, and Angela, radiant even in a house robe, had cradled their infant son against her shoulder while humming quietly. Jordan remembered the way she laughed, low and tired, but rich, when he'd held up a hand-painted wooden rattle and said, "He's going to be an artist like his father." Angela had looked down at the baby, then back at him with a softness that still haunted his sleep. But not all stories get the time they deserve. Angela's heart failed before her son turned 4. And in the chaos that followed, the custody disputes, the Whitmore lawyers, the threats whispered behind glass walls, Jordan had been outmaneuvered. A black man with no savings and no recognized custody agreement didn't stand a chance against the Whitmores. They didn't even acknowledge him in court. The records were sealed. The name on the birth certificate was removed. Liam was told that his mother had a complicated past, and no further questions were encouraged. Back in the ballroom, Richard excused himself. He rose slowly, nodding half-heartedly to those around him, and made his way through the double doors, past the velvet rope, and into the hallway where the walls were lined with oil portraits of donors and founders, all of them pale, all of them grinning. He leaned against the marble, one hand on the wall as if bracing himself. Jordan had followed, not with anger, but with the steady determination of someone who had been silenced for too long. When Richard finally turned, Jordan was already there, not looming, not threatening, simply present. That was enough. You knew, Jordan said, his voice low but firm. Richard's lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced to the side, swallowed hard, then forced a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. You're mistaken. Don't, Jordan said, shaking his head slowly. Don't insult both of us. A pause. You weren't supposed to be here, Richard muttered. Jordan tilted his head. And yet here I am. Richard's eyes narrowed. You said you wouldn't fight. I didn't, Jordan said. I let your lawyers win. I let your name erase mine. I let your money cut ties between me and my son, because I couldn't give him what you could. Not then. He took a breath. But that doesn't mean I stopped being his father. Richard's face twitched, years of pride twisting beneath the surface. He doesn't know, and he doesn't need to know. He's fine. He's mine. Jordan interrupted, voice tight now. You raised him with walls of silence and told yourself that was protection. But someday, Richard, someday he'll ask who I was. And what will you say then? Richard looked away. Jordan stepped closer, but not to intimidate, only to be heard. I didn't come here to cause a scene, he said. I didn't even know he'd be here. But now that I've seen him, now that he's seen me, it's not something we can bury again. Richard's shoulders sagged. He suddenly looked older. If he finds out, Richard whispered, he'll hate me. That's not my burden, Jordan said. That's yours. Back inside, Liam sat alone now, his drink untouched, eyes scanning the room. He didn't know why he kept looking toward the service corridor, why something about the waiter's voice had stuck with him, or why he felt like there was something more beneath the man's eyes, something familiar, something that pulled at him. And for the first time in years, he found himself remembering a photograph in a drawer, one his mother used to keep. A black man, smiling, standing beside a woman who looked more alive than she ever did in any of the portraits his father kept. He had always thought it was just a friend. But now, Liam sat stiffly at the table, swirling the untouched glass of wine in his hand, his mind racing through memories that no longer made sense, or perhaps never had. He wasn't hearing the music anymore. He wasn't watching the speeches or the silent auction paddles being raised. He was staring into the burgundy depths of his glass as though it might offer answers that had been kept from him his entire life. That man, that waiter, Jordan, there was something about him that clung to the air long after he'd left the room. Not just dignity, not just grace, but presence, familiar presence. A calm strength Liam couldn't name, but had felt before, like the echo of a voice he hadn't heard in years. And then there was his father. Richard hadn't returned yet. That alone was strange. He was never one to leave a gala early, not when there were hands to shake and reputations to reinforce. Liam stood. He walked toward the hallway. Outside in the corridor, Jordan had moved to a quiet service area, his bow tie now untied, the fabric slack around his neck. He stood near a utility cart, staring out a narrow side window at the glowing city skyline. He wasn't thinking about Richard anymore, not directly. He was thinking about Liam, about the way the boy had looked at him, about how much of Angela he had seen in those eyes. He never thought the day would come when the past would walk into the same room as the future and demand to be acknowledged. He heard the footsteps behind him before he turned. Jordan, right? It was Liam. His voice was calm, but tight. Jordan turned slowly, his expression neutral. Yes. You were the one who poured my dad's wine earlier. I was, Jordan said carefully. You handled that pretty well, Liam said, trying to smile, though something trembled at the edge of it. I wouldn't have. Jordan didn't answer that. He merely looked at him, long enough that Liam began to feel the weight of the silence. My dad's. Well, he's not always easy, Liam offered. But that doesn't excuse. I'm not here to make him smaller, Jordan said gently. Liam frowned slightly. I'm just trying to understand something, Liam continued. You looked at me like you knew me. Jordan stayed still. I feel crazy saying this, Liam said, a little laugh escaping. Nervous now, but I feel like I've seen you before. I don't mean tonight. I mean, when I was a kid. Maybe I'm wrong. Jordan finally spoke. You're not wrong. Liam blinked. Then who are you? Jordan took a breath, one so deep it seemed to draw from somewhere buried. Do you remember a woman named Angela? Liam straightened. My mom. Jordan nodded. She and I, we were together. For years. Liam's face shifted, confusion, dawning realization, then a silence so thick it could have shattered glass. Wait. He stepped back, his hand gripping the wall. You're... Jordan didn't say it. He let Liam find the words on his own. My biological father? The words came out in a whisper. Jordan's eyes filled slightly, but his voice remained steady. Yes. Liam just stood there, jaw slack, eyes wide. But my dad, he said. He stopped himself. He said she didn't have anyone serious. That she'd made mistakes. Jordan closed his eyes briefly. I wasn't a mistake, and I never left by choice. Liam stared at him like he was seeing a ghost. All this time, he whispered, you were alive. You were here. I didn't have the power to fight the Whitmores in court, Jordan said. They erased me, changed records, told lies. And when Angela passed, they made sure I couldn't get near you. I didn't even know where they'd moved you. Liam's breathing was shallow now, his hand running through his hair. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. You're a waiter. I've been many things, Jordan said gently. I do what I can. I've worked as a builder, a painter. I took this job because I needed the hours, not because I stopped being someone. Liam swallowed hard. I have questions. I have answers, Jordan said. But they might not be what you want to hear. I don't care, Liam said. I need to know. Jordan nodded. Then let's not do it here. They stepped outside into the quiet night. Across the street, limos idled, and a valet lit a cigarette behind a pillar, pretending not to notice. They walked to a small bench near the fountain, the same one where Jordan had once sat with Angela in the early days, holding a sleeping toddler on his shoulder while whispering dreams neither of them had money to chase. Now, the son from that dream sat across from him. How did you meet my mom? Liam asked, his voice quieter now. Jordan smiled slightly. She used to run this little poetry night at a community cafe in Harlem. I came in looking for a job. She hired me to fix a broken shelf in the back. I fixed it, then came back every night for the poetry. Liam smiled, despite himself. She had that effect. Jordan nodded. She saw people, not the version they performed, the real ones. They sat in silence for a while. Then Liam whispered, Why didn't she tell me about you? She tried, Jordan said. But when she got sick, they isolated her. Your grandparents took over her care. By the time she passed, they'd locked me out of every decision. And your father, well, you saw what he's capable of. Liam looked away. I feel like my life was built on half-truths. Jordan nodded. You're not alone in that. Liam exhaled, long and slow. I don't know what to do now. You don't have to know tonight, Jordan said. I'm not asking for anything. Not your forgiveness. Not a place in your life. Just the truth. Liam looked back at him, tears beginning to rim his eyes. You're the first person who's ever told me something that felt true about her. Jordan reached into his pocket. I want you to have this, he said. It was a photo, faded and creased. Angela, holding a baby Liam, both of them laughing. Liam took it with trembling hands. I remember this, he whispered. I've seen it in a box, but I never knew who took it. I did, Jordan said quietly. The silence inside the limousine was suffocating. Richard Whitmore sat alone, staring out the tinted window at the empty sidewalk, watching guests from the gala drift out into the night with their laughter and silk shawls and false generosity. His fingers tapped against the leather seat, twitching with a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. Not in a courtroom, not in a board meeting, not even when the market crashed and took half of his portfolio with it. But tonight was different. Because tonight, the one thing he had always controlled, the narrative, was slipping from his grasp. His son had walked off with him. Jordan Knox. That man. That shadow from the past who wasn't supposed to return, certainly not in a starched collar and polished shoes, serving wine in a room full of millionaires. He was supposed to have vanished after Angela's death, disappeared like a storm that had finally passed. But now he was back. And worse, Liam knew. Across the city, in a quiet corner cafe that stayed open late for musicians and night shift workers, Jordan and Liam sat in a booth tucked beneath a chalkboard menu. The lighting was dim, warm, the kind of light that didn't judge, didn't demand anything, just existed. Liam stirred the tea in front of him with a spoon he hadn't touched in 10 minutes. His eyes were fixed on the table. "So," he finally said, "what happens now?" Jordan leaned back slightly. His voice was calm, but thoughtful. "That's not really my decision." Liam looked up. "You're my father." "I am," Jordan said quietly. "But I haven't been in your life. I'm not going to pretend I can suddenly take that place. That's something you have to decide. I'll be here if you want me." Liam's throat moved as he swallowed. "I don't even know what I feel. Angry, grateful, confused. All of those are fair," Jordan replied. "I wish I'd known you sooner." Jordan looked down, smiling sadly. "I wish that too." They were quiet for a moment. Then Liam asked the question he'd been circling all night. "Why didn't you fight harder?" Jordan didn't flinch. He expected that. "I did," he said. "In every way I knew how. But the Whitmores had resources I didn't. And after Angela passed, your grandparents had already started working on custody. They said I was unstable, said I couldn't provide, that my record as a construction worker wasn't reliable. They even said I was dangerous. Not because I was, just because it helped their case." Liam's eyes burned. "My mother would have never allowed that." "No," Jordan agreed. "But she wasn't in a position to stop it anymore. And by the time I got a lawyer, the system had already closed the doors." Liam clenched his fist. "I hate that they made me believe she had no one. That she was just some wild chapter in my dad's life. Something he overcame." Jordan nodded. "Angela was the best part of my life. You were the second." Liam's voice cracked. "You still are?" Jordan didn't speak. He couldn't. But something in his eyes said everything. The next morning, Richard was sitting at the marble island of his penthouse kitchen, sipping espresso he wasn't tasting, when Liam walked through the door. He wasn't dressed in his usual pressed shirt and chinos. He wore jeans, a hoodie. His hair was slightly tousled, like he hadn't slept. He tossed his keys on the counter and stared at his father for a long moment. Richard looked up. "I assume you've got something to say?" Liam's jaw tightened. "You stole my life." Richard's brow furrowed. "That's dramatic." "You erased someone from my memory," Liam snapped. "You rewrote history to protect your ego." "I did what was best for you." "No," Liam said. "You did what was best for you. You couldn't stand that mom loved someone who didn't fit into your perfect picture, someone who challenged your control." Richard stood, slowly. "Don't talk to me like I'm the villain here," he said. "I raised you. I gave you everything." "Accept the truth," Liam said. "You think money can replace that?" Richard stepped around the counter. "I made sacrifices. You have no idea what that man was like back then." "I know what he's like now," Liam said. "He's honest. He's kind. And he didn't try to erase you." Richard's face twisted. "He's a waiter, Liam." "And you're a coward," Liam replied. The silence that followed was thunderous. "You don't know what it was like, watching her fall for someone like him. Watching her choose him over everything we built. She could have had security, reputation. She chose love," Liam said. "And that scares you. Because for once, you weren't the one holding the pen." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. Liam stepped back. "I'm not cutting you off, Dad. I'm not burning everything down. But things are different now. He turned. I'm going to get to know him, and nothing you say can stop that. Richard didn't follow him. He just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the door his son had just walked through. The door he'd once believed he had locked forever. That afternoon, Jordan sat on a park bench with a sketch pad in his lap, the wind rustling the trees above. He hadn't drawn in years, not really. But today, his hand moved with ease. A soft voice broke the silence. Is that supposed to be me? Jordan looked up. Liam stood before him, smiling shyly. It's more of a guess, Jordan said, showing him the sketch. A boy on a swing, wind in his hair, reaching for the sky. Liam sat beside him. I'd say it's pretty close. 2 weeks had passed, yet the tremors of that night at the charity gala still echoed. In the papers, among the whispers of high society cocktail circles, and, more importantly, in the lives of three men bound together by history, silence, and blood. Liam had made no secret of the discovery. He had spoken with his friends, then to his legal advisor, then finally to the press. Not out of vengeance, but because stories hidden in the dark fester, and some truths demand the dignity of daylight. It wasn't a scandal, though that's how some tried to spin it. It was a reckoning, a quiet but public acknowledgement of the black man who had been erased from the narrative. A man who had lived in the shadows, in quiet jobs and second chances, while others dined on his silence. Jordan Knox was no longer a whisper. He was a name, a father, at a small but intentionally public event hosted at a Brooklyn community center, the same place where Angela had once read poetry into dimly lit microphones. Liam stood before a modest crowd of local artists, activists, family, and friends. And beside him, not behind, stood Jordan. No tuxedo, no tray, just a father in a gray button-down shirt, his back straight, his eyes full. Liam stepped up to the mic. My name is Liam Whitmore, he began, and for most of my life, I was told a version of my family story that left someone out. The room was silent. Tonight, I want to change that. I want you to meet my father. He turned to Jordan. Jordan didn't speak for a long moment. His eyes met Liam's, and for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to believe that something stolen could still, in part, be returned. I never thought I'd stand here, he began. I never thought I'd see the day where the truth would have room to breathe. He looked out at the audience, his voice steady. I lost the love of my life to illness. I lost my son to a system that didn't see me as worthy. But tonight, I stand not in bitterness, but in gratitude. Because this young man had the courage to go looking, to ask questions, and to listen. Liam placed a hand on his father's shoulder. The applause wasn't explosive. It was quiet, reverent, like a prayer finally answered. Later that night, as the chairs were being folded and lights turned off, Liam and Jordan sat on the back steps of the center. Did you ever think, Liam asked, that we'd get here? Jordan smiled. I thought about it. Every day, but I didn't let myself hope for it. Well, Liam said, nudging his shoulder, start hoping more often. Jordan chuckled. You remind me of her, he said. Not just in how you speak, but in how you stand. She never backed down from anything. Liam leaned his head back against the wall, eyes to the stars. I think I want to go see where she's buried. I'd like that, Jordan said softly. They sat in silence again. But this time, it was a silence full of peace. And for the first time since that photograph was taken so many years ago, the one of a laughing woman holding her son, the story was whole again. Not perfect, not unscarred, but whole.